Hey there, thanks for joining me. I hope you are enjoying your vacation. We are going to continue today with the next chapters. Last time we met some important characters, the main character, Nan, who's 10 years old, and we also met the other boys who are in Crud's chimney sweep crew. That was Newt, Whittles, Shilling Tom, and Roger. We also met a mysterious character referred to as Sweep from Nan's life before. So we'll hear more about that. And today we're going to meet Master Crud and Mrs. Trundle. So let's continue. The Sweep's Gift. The girl was just 6 years old when it happened. She and her sweep had both gone to bed as they always had, nestled against a chimney stack beneath the starry sky. But when the girl woke the next morning, her sweep was gone. She did not worry straight away. Chimney folk are natural rovers, as rootless as the four winds. She assumed her sweep had nipped off to forage for breakfast. They called these little trips belly quests. He would come back any moment now with ripe figs stolen from a low bough, or quail's eggs swiped from a nest, or even, if they had money, day-old rolls from the baker. But the sweep did not come back with figs or eggs or rolls. When morning turned to afternoon, the girl began to let herself worry. They had only just recently come to this new town, the great kingdom of London. The sweep had told her all sorts of stories about dragons in the river and banshees in the fog, and she wasn't sure which of them were true and which were play. The sweep liked to pass the time by telling stories, and so the girl now told herself stories. She made up fanciful tales about magic bookshops, talking fruit trees, and blind thieves who could open any lock. The stories were all brilliant, but no matter what she started, every story always led her back to that rooftop, alone, hungry, waiting for her sweep. The girl scolded herself for becoming afraid. For all she knew, this was some sort of new game. The sweep was probably hiding behind one of the chimney stacks, waiting to jump out and surprise her. "Ha-ha," he would say, and scoop her up in his arms. "My little sparrow has flown at last from her nest." The girl got up and started to check the rooftop. She checked the stacks and peered over the eaves. She could just make out the words on a sign hanging by the entrance of the house directly beneath her. Willie Crud, Esquire, the clean sweep. The girl remembered how funny she found this at the time, the idea of a sweep being clean. She widened her search. She checked the rooftops across the entire block, taking care to look behind every stack, even pointing her head into the chimney pots. At last, she returned to the spot where she had started, more frightened than before. She took up the sweep's coat, which lay folded beside her soot bag. And that was when she saw the hat. There was nothing more sacred to a chimney sweep than his hat. It remained with him at all times, even in the privy and the bath. Lose your hat, even for a moment, the sweep often told her, is to summon 1,000 tragedies. He was always telling the girl stories about foolish chimney sweeps who mislaid their hats, only to have a church steeple or a wild elephant come down on their heads. He had also promised that someday, when he became too frail to climb, the hat would be hers. And so when she saw the sweep's hat, which he had concealed beneath his coat, she knew something had gone horribly wrong. Her first thought was that the sweep had tumbled from the roof in his sleep. He usually tied a rope around his waist to prevent this, but perhaps he had forgotten. But somehow she knew that the hat was no accident. He had left it for her. The girl knelt and took the hat in her small hands. The brim was warm to the touch. She smelled the sweet aroma of kindling. When she leaned close, she saw that there was something inside the crown. She reached inside and removed a small clump made of ash or coal or soot. She could not tell which. It was about the size of her fist. The outside was crumbly, but it would not break when she squeezed it, and it was very warm. Imagine discovering that the only person you have ever known and loved was now gone without a word, not a note, not a message, only a strange lump of flickering char. The girl's first emotion was anger. She very nearly threw the char over the edge of the roof. But something within her checked this impulse, and she clasped the clump to her breast. She held it so tight that it could have turned into a diamond. Without the sweep, the girl had nothing to do and nowhere to go, and so she waited on the roof, hoping the sweep would return. She clung to the piece of char, her only inheritance. Even in the bitterest cold, it kept her warm. Indeed, it was the thing that kept her alive. The clean sweep. Nan woke from a dead sleep to the bells of St. Florian's Church. She heard once that the St. Florian was the patron saint of all chimney sweeps. She thought if that were true, then he shouldn't make his bells ring so early. Nan rubbed soot from her eyes. She had been dreaming of before. It was a thing she tried not to remember, but the dreams wouldn't let her forget. "Get a move on, you lot," a voice yelled from upstairs. The boys were on their feet in a flash, no time for yawning or stretching. They stampeded up the wooden steps, pushing against one another to get to the kitchen before the bell finished its 5 o'clock toll. Nan sprang up and started to run with them, but then she stopped, feeling her coat. "My char!" It must have fallen from her pocket when she got up. This happened a lot. No matter how tightly she held on to it in the night, by morning it would find a way to slip from her grip, almost as if it had a mind of its own. Nan dug through the scattered coals along the east wall. It was like finding a needle in the haystack. Finally, she uncovered it, warm and familiar. It was where she usually located it, right beneath the window that looked out towards St. Florian's churchyard. Nan paused for a moment, looking more closely at the char in the early light. She noticed 2 small divots in the face, equal in size. They looked for all the world like a pair of eyes. "Step lively, Cinderella," Roger called from the top of the stairs. "You know what happens when the bell strikes midnight." He shut the door. Nan heard the lock click behind him. Nan cursed Roger under her breath and stuffed the char in her pocket. The bells continued ringing as she clambered into the coal bin's chimney, which connected to the kitchen hearth above it. By the time Nan reached the main floor, the boys were already seated along the table, slurping up bowls of hot gruel. Porridge was thick and filling and needed to be eaten with a spoon, but gruel was different. It was mostly water. You could drink it straight from the bowl. This was the only food they could expect today. Nan squeezed between Whittles and Newt and reached for her waiting bowl. Whap! A wooden spoon came down on her hand. She shrieked, clutching her fingers. "You're late, Missy," Mrs. Trundle said, looming over her. Trundle was a widow, and Nan always thought her late husband was probably glad to be rid of her. The woman was mean as a weasel in winter. Her apron was splattered gray and smelled awful. She kept a giant iron pot perched on her hip like an infant. The inside of the pot was caked with brown muck that had once been food. That last bell was rung by the time you sat down. She jabbed the end of her gruel-covered spoon at Nan. "You know the rule, stragglers starve." Nan clutched her throbbing hand. "Sorry, ma'am." She sucked the bits of gruel from her knuckle and forced herself not to cry. In 5 years, she had not once let herself cry in this home. She knew Crud would enjoy it too much. Trundle snatched Nan's bowl and poured the uneaten gruel back into the pot. "Never you fear, it'll be waiting for you tomorrow." For as long as Nan had lived in the house, she had never once seen that gruel pot cleaned. Every morning, a few more ingredients were added. It was impossible to tell where one batch ended and another began. A door creaked behind her. "Brooms up!" She and the other climbers all leaped to attention as Wilkie Crud stepped into the room. "Mr. Crud," Mrs. Trundle said, in an almost girlish voice. "Good morning to you." She bent her knees in something like a curtsy. "It's not good yet," Crud replied. That will depend entirely on whether these imps do their jobs. He talked the way Nan imagined a ship's captain might talk. I got your boots, sir, Roger said. Shined 'em up real good. Used his tongue and everything, Whittles muttered. Chilling Tom started to laugh, but a look from Crud cut him short. Crud took his seat at the head of the table. Roger rushed to meet him with his boots. They really were shiny. Wilkie Crud had built a reputation as the clean sweep. Instead of the blacks of a proper sweep, he wore a green velvet jacket with gold piping. His shirt and breeches were spotless white. Even his brush was clean. This was not vanity, but calculation. He knew that wealthy customers preferred to work with someone who looked like them, so they could forget just how filthy the job really was. Nan couldn't see it, but she knew from the way housemaids talked that Crud was quite handsome. The widow Trundle was the latest in a long line of romantic conquest. Every few months, Crud brought in a new woman to cook and keep house. Nan was fairly certain these women worked for nothing, perhaps in the hope that Crud might see their value and make an offer of marriage. He never did. Mrs. Trundle set a covered plate in front of him. I'll fix up a special breakfast for you, sir. With a flourish, she removed the cover. Delicious hot smells assaulted Nan's nose. Roast pheasant with bread sauce, your favorite. Crud pushed the steaming plate away without even looking at it. None for me, Mrs. Trundle. I'll be eating my fill on the job. 3 weddings. Weddings were a tidy business for chimney sweeps. Everyone knew that paying a sweep to attend your wedding guaranteed years of happiness. And the sweep was in such high demand as the clean sweep, and no sweep was in such high demand as the clean sweep. Days are getting shorter since autumn's begun. I shouldn't plan to be home before dark. Too busy kissing the brides for luck, eh, sir? Roger said, helping Crud don his overcoat. Nan saw Mrs. Trundle wince slightly, as if she'd just pricked her finger. Crud glanced at the table, specifically at the empty space in front of Nan. We seem to be a bowl short, he gave Trundle an inquiring look. The girl was late for breakfast, the woman said, and she knows my rule. Your rule, not mine, he said. I've a business to run. I can't have my best climber start the day on an empty stomach. This was not so much a compliment as a slap aimed at Roger. Of course, Trundle said, only there's none left in the pot. A dirty lie. Let her have my breakfast then, Crud nodded toward the pheasant. But Wilkie, the woman protested. The bird alone costs half a shilling. Psh, Shilling Tom muttered. That ain't so fancy, I could buy 2. Don't worry yourself about the cost. Crud walked to the front door and took up his broom. Only the best for my best. Nan could feel both Trundle and Roger glaring at her. She kept her eyes on Crud, who was watching her with an expectant smile. Well? She breathed in the smell of the food. It nearly made her knees buckle. She lowered her head. I'm not hungry. Okay, so that's it for tonight, and we will see you again tomorrow. Thanks.